trickle in here as they do. First of all, Dennis, who's on WebEx?
Yes, good morning, Mr. Chair. We have no representatives on WebEx at this moment.
All right, very good. Thank you. Thank you. Bill introductions. Does anyone have any bill introductions? Seeing none, I do have a bill introduction. The number is 0782, RS 0782. And this is tobacco 21. So I don't have any more of a description than that, but basically it's just raising the legal age to buy tobacco in Kansas from 18 to 21. Questions? Seeing none, bill's introduced. Okay, today we're going to have a hearing on Kratom. We're going to have two separate hearings on because they're two separate bills. So some of the folks are just going to say ditto on their testimony, but I think that's the only way that we could hear those bills in their entirety separately. So with that, I'm going to open the hearing on 2084, and I have a proponent of Max Haddo. Max, welcome to committee. Yeah, I don't have one. I haven't talked to him about that. Yeah. Oh, sorry, Max. I'm sorry. Revisor Mac. Forgive me. I'll remember this one of these days.
My time with the Revisor of Statutes Office, and Mr. Chairman, anytime you want to skip me, you're welcome to. But anyway, House Bill 2084 is a bill regulating Kratom. And I'll just briefly run through this. It's a fairly simple bill. Sections 1 through 6 could be cited as the Kratom Consumer Protection Act. Section 2 contains definitions. You might pay attention to the Kratom extract and Kratom product. Section 3 provides, and the secretary is the Secretary of Agriculture. Section 3, a processor shall not prepare, distribute, sell, or expose any of the following: a Kratom product that is adulterated with a dangerous non-Kratom substance. That's sub B there, the same type of thing. You can't sell them if it's contaminated with a non-Kratom substance, basically something in the Uniform Controlled Substances Act. In other words, you can't lace it with drugs. Kratom extract that contains levels of residual solvents higher than is allowed under this United States Pharmacopoeia Chapter 467. Kratom product containing level 7 of a word that I'm not going to try and pronounce. A Kratom product containing synthetic alkaloids or a Kratom product that the labeling directions aren't good. So there's a prohibition for sale of Kratom products to anybody that's under 18 years of age. Section 5 provides for civil penalty for violations. Can be a fine, first offense of not more than $1,000, second and subsequent offenses up to $2,000. Retailer does not violate the law if there's preponderance of evidence that they relied in good faith upon the representations of the manufacturer and so on. Secretary of Agriculture is given the responsibility for adopting rules and regs to administer the program. That's it.
Very good. Committee questions of the revisor. Representative Humphreys.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So we have not had a Kratom Consumer Protection Act before? Is this anywhere
This-
else in statute, or these are all brand new things?
That's right. It's all brand new. And the next bill we'll talk about actually passed the House 2 years ago. Nothing became law. And this is based on a model act. And in all honesty, I don't know exactly where the model act came from, but maybe some of the conferees will tell
Okay,
you that.
great. Thank you so much.
Committee, further questions? Mike, I have just one really quick one. Does it address labeling in this bill? The labeling of kratom?
Right.
Is it addressed in this bill?
There is a labeling issue, that labeling, this is on page 2F. It does not include, provide labeling instructions necessary for the safe use. So it does contain a labeling requirement.
Very good. Thank you. Committee, further questions? All right. Thank you, Mike. Now we'll start over here with a proponent, Mac Haddo.
Yes.
Okay, very good.
Thank you, Mr.
American
Chairman, members of the
Kratom
committee.
Association.
My name is Mac Caddo. I'm the Senior Fellow on Public Policy with the American Kratom Association. We represent the 12 to 15 million American consumers who regularly consume kratom in the United States. In the first attempt by the U.S. Food and Drug Administration to ban kratom that occurred in 2016, there were about 3 to 5 million American consumers. And the perverse outcome of the attempts by the FDA to ban kratom at the federal level, which was unsuccessful and has been in 3 separate attempts, was that people became more aware of kratom. Now, there was a good side and the bad side to that. The good side is that people discovered the benefits that kratom provides, which is broken roughly into 3 categories of consumers. First is those that use it as a replacement for a cup of coffee for the energy boost and increased focus. Some people have found that at larger doses, that it helps them with anxiety and feelings of depression. And then at larger doses, in the area that has attracted the most attention, both of the FDA and the National Institute on Drug Abuse, is that people have found that it helps them as a harm reduction tool to reduce their reliance upon opioids as a pain management therapy and to wean off of dangerous addictions that come. And while kratom, you can become dependent on it because of its psychoactive properties, it does not have the same euphoric high associated with traditional pain medications. And its addiction profile is significantly different. And actually, people have found and studies have shown that kratom can be a great harm reduction tool, which is why today the National Institute on Drug Abuse has a significant amount of research being conducted with our tax dollars in order to identify the proper characterization of kratom. And today, NIDA is a full-throated advocate for accessibility of consumers for kratom because of its harm reduction tools. So today, what we face is an unregulated environment in the states. The reason for that is that the FDA, in its attempts to ban kratom, has been refusing to actually regulate kratom products as they are statutorily obligated to do. Thankfully, there is a federal bill that has been filed. And to illustrate how this is a bipartisan effort, Senator Mike Lee of Utah, arguably one of the most conservative members of the United States Senate, and Senator Cory Booker of New Jersey, arguably one of the most liberal, have joined in this bill to compel the FDA to properly regulate kratom. That's a process that started. In the interim, the American Kratom Association, and we were the initiators of the Model Kratom Consumer Protection Act back in 2019. 7 states have adopted this bill since 2017. Utah, Georgia, Arizona, Nevada, Oregon, Colorado, and Oklahoma. It is active in legislative activity in this session in another 24 states. The purpose of this is to assure that when a Kansas consumer purchases a kratom product, which they can do today legally, it must be labeled properly so that they understand the safe use of kratom, what the serving size would be and the number of serving sizes in the package, and it must identify the component parts of the product, which would include a limitation on one of the compounds in the kratom product called 7-hydroxymetrogenate. which in its natural form, which scientists have actually characterized as nature having gotten it right, does not have any adverse health impacts. But if synthetically enhanced, which some bad actor vendors do, then it becomes a dangerous product. So we propose a limitation based on new science, which has shown the original bill that we suggested was a 2% level. Anything higher than that would have been dangerous. We now suggest that be limited to 1% based on science now is proving that at its naturally occurring state, you never get above 1%. Anything above that is artificially enhanced. And so we think that's a protection for consumers that's very important. And then to ban any dangerous substance being added to kratom, because that's what bad actor vendors are doing today. They're adding adulterants like fentanyl, morphine, heroin, and cocaine, sometimes buprenorphine, all to give the natural kratom product an enhanced effect that the natural product does not have. And so if a consumer purchases kratom today in Kansas and feels that kick, that euphoric high, that's an adulterated product. And it's dangerous because it has all of the addictive properties of the underlying adulterant substance. And it should, in fact, be banned from introduction into the marketplace. And that's what this bill would do. And importantly, labeling has to include who manufactures it. If there is an adverse event that occurs with the kratom product, you should know where to go to file your adverse event report with the Food and Drug Administration, who welcomes it, by the way, and they will take action when they know about it. But most manufacturers today don't even put their address on it, so the consumers to do it. I submitted written testimony. I hope you'll read it. Be glad to answer any questions, Mr. Chairman, that anyone might have about this legislation.
Very good. Thank you. Committee questions. Representative Reeves.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And welcome to the committee this morning. Kind of interested. We've been a lot of discussion about kratom for the last several years. What's the minimum age to purchase kratom products?
So we recommend that, subject to the authority of the state, but it's 18 or 21. There are arguments on both sides of that equation. It certainly shouldn't be sold to anyone under the age of 18.
Mr. Chairman, if I may.
Sure.
What type of additives would bad users or bad actors use on kratom to enhance the effects of it, or add something else? What kind of products are they using?
So if I understood the question, Representative, it was, why do they do it? Why do they add the?
What do they add?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Like formaldehyde, things that like they used to use on cigarettes and.
Yeah, so there are
LSD.
two concerns. If you use a kratom extract product, you will see in the legislation you're limited to food grade extraction methods approved by the FDA as listed in the monograph with the USP. Because if you use different kinds of extraction things, it can enhance the effect of the product. So we restrict it to food grade extraction methods. The more common issue is adulteration in adding to the kratom powder, and that's typically what it comes in, either in powder form or capsules, sometimes in tinctures, like a 5-hour energy drink. Those will have fentanyl or cocaine or buprenorphine or morphine added to it in order to give that kick to the product that is the natural product does not have.
Representative Clayton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for being here. So I have a question. We are looking at this bill that would define kratom as a food product, but you're also talking about how you definitely don't think that kratom should be something for people under the age of 18, or in some states potentially under the age of 21. So I guess what I want to know is, why a food product? Why not something else? Can you walk me through that, please?
Sure. Thank you, Representative. It's a great question. Under the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act, everything is either a food or a drug. In the food category, it is either a conventional food, or it is a dietary ingredient, or it is a dietary supplement. Under the federal law, a dietary supplement, unless it was in commerce prior to 1994, which kratom was, by the way, came just after the Vietnam War. Our soldiers brought it back from Southeast Asia. So that happened, but the FDA won't recognize that because we don't have any sales slips that were generated by a computerized software system, because there weren't any in existence at the time. So now we're caught in this vortex. If you want to market a kratom product as a dietary supplement, you have to demonstrate with clinical evidence the safety of it in order to have what's called a structure function claim, which would help you with labeling. So absent that, and that's open, by the way. The FDA won't recognize any, but it's open for a kratom manufacturer. Some have pursued that. But the other two, a dietary ingredient and a food, is just a technical category established by the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act. It is not a food in the traditional sense like you would buy a salad or something. It obviously is a dietary ingredient, but it's not subject to the dietary supplement regulations until you make a structure function claim. Thank you.
Any further questions? Representative? Oh, yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. What is the recommended serving size for kratom?
So generally speaking, this is a manufacturer's decision to tell what's in their product, because there are certain formulations of product with the level of metrogenine, which is the alkaloid that's the common, most prevalent alkaloid in the kratom plant. So if you were to have a metrogenine count of X, then you would limit your serving size, because the effect is usually 2 to 4 grams of kratom is the typical serving size that someone would take it for in order to achieve this increase, like a replacement for a cup of coffee. 4 to 6 grams would be in the category of those people seeking a little bit of anxiety relief and symptoms of depression. So by putting the serving size limits on the product, depending on the formulation of their product, would be the appropriate way for a consumer to understand what the right the dosage level would be.
Thank you for that. And then is there a dangerous amount to take? You can take too much overdose.
So I can't tell you with certainty that you can't overdose on kratom. The 2 centuries of safe use in Southeast Asia prior to coming to the United States, we have not seen a single documented case of an overdose on pure kratom. When you get the information from the Centers for Disease Control, all of the deaths that were associated, the FDA claims were associated with kratom, were actually because of polydrug use or because adulterants were added to it. And I would add, just to show you the frustration we have as a consumer advocacy organization, we have referred 64 companies who manufacture and then advertise a kratom product with an illegal therapeutic claim. They claim that it helps you with pain or it helps you with opioid withdrawal. And the FDA has failed to take any action over the last 24 months on documented evidence of that. So that's one of our problems. But the problem is these adulterants that are added, and the CDC has identified those. 78% of kratom detected in an autopsy where the death occurred, 78% were fentanyl. And that's the adulterant of choice right now. And that's something, obviously, it's extremely dangerous. Even if it doesn't kill you, it's highly addictive. And so we want to ban those from any of the controlled substances from a kratom product.
Do you see any value then in adding some sort of warning in this labeling portion of the bill? I mean, is this safe to use if you're pregnant or nursing? I guess I just want to make sure that since it's not, the FDA doesn't issue those types of consumer awareness issues, that we are putting on there that it could potentially be unsafe if you don't take the recommended amount, or if you're pregnant. I guess I just don't know in those cases.
So the typical requirement for the Food and Drug Administration, and if they were doing their job with kratom, they would, the labeling requires that you put on that it has not been evaluated by the FDA for health and safety. We recommend to vendors who work with us on what we call our good manufacturing program that they label it with warnings with respect to its safety, warning minors, warning pregnant women. There's been no studies about whether kratom can be safely taken during pregnancies. So we think that's an appropriate warning. And certainly the Department of Agriculture could help in formulating what the specific labeling is. We welcome any of those warnings in order to protect consumers.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Very good. Thank you. Representative Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for being here this morning, Mr. Maddow. My question is regarding a possible definition of the word dangerous as it refers to additives. The reason I ask is something like caffeine would be considered relatively not dangerous, but I would say I consume a dangerous amount of caffeine every day. So what is it that constitutes dangerous, or is it illegal substances, or would somebody consider adding green tea extract or caffeine extract to a kratom product?
So
For-
this is an excellent area for us to describe the difference in kratom, for example, with caffeine. Caffeine is the most widely used drug in the world. It has addictive properties. Diet Coke is my addiction for caffeine. Uh, the scientists call that a benign addiction because they have seen from use that it doesn't have any significant issues with respect to danger. But dangerous substances have a specific legal connotation, and the outcome is found in the way that the federal government regulates dietary supplements. So they say any dangerous ingredient is found in case reports that are then submitted through it's called the FAERS database, the FDA Adverse Events Reporting System. So if there is an adverse event, it's reported by a physician or any healthcare professional or a citizen. And then the FDA looks for clusters of events, these adverse events, and they determine whether then action should be taken. So the danger level is found in the experiences of consumers. And if you get a cluster of adverse event reports, you take action. And that's the way we identify adulterants, unfortunately, unless once you could test a kratom product, and if you find there's an adulterant in it, then that's the reason to take action against it. Most are because of adverse events by consumers in the dietary supplement field.
Thank you.
Representative Hasswood.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have two questions. First one is either maybe for you or the revisor. Does this bill cover the packaging such as child lock lids? I think a lot of kratom comes in Ziploc bags and very accessible, such as in gas stations.
We're not fans of Ziploc bags for packaging of kratom. We think that that's inappropriate. You should have a package that is typical of an adult product that is consumed. It should be resistant. That's certainly something you could have as a Department of Agriculture rule. What we have found in the states that have passed the Kratom Consumer Protection Act, there is consistent compliance with excellent packaging and labeling because it's required. And the good actors will certainly comply with that. I don't think you'll see a major problem with the packaging. I think you'll see the elimination of these Ziploc bags.
Thank you. And I have a second question, if I may, Mr. Chair.
Sure.
So doing a little bit of the research that I've done, it seems like folks are kind of self-diagnosing, or I guess self-recommending diagnoses, especially if they're using kratom to help with their addictions of like heroin and opioids. I guess, does this bill address, or maybe the future bills on the recommended dosage or seeking medical professional recommendations? It seems like folks are just kind of saying, this is what I use to help deal with the side effects of my opioid addiction.
So there are two parts to that question. The first would be that the National Institute on Drug Abuse, when they examined the addiction liability of kratom, they determined through gold standard studies that were completed, and I'm glad to share those with you if you would like them, that there is no significant addiction liability to kratom. And in fact, they observed in the animal test that their test animals developed an aversion to morphine, which was the reference drug they were using to test it. That led to more extensive animal studies specifically on whether kratom can alleviate the symptoms of pain and chronic pain that are associated with opioids that are used. And what they found is that kratom is not a perfect substitute for opioids. There's a place for doctor supervised opioid use or pain management use. Kratom is helpful for people that want to not have opioids, and that's what NIDA has found. And they encourage with full-throated enthusiasm the value of kratom as a harm reduction tool. Now, one concern is that people are self-medicating. We think people should obviously consult a doctor when they're struggling with these pain issues. We're finding an increased awareness among physicians about kratom and a more acceptance of it, and it helps people. And as a harm reduction tool, we all favor that, except the FDA, because they want to make it a drug. I understand that, but that's not the appropriate thing. And that's why NIDA testifies regularly before Congress and publishes reports about why kratom should, in fact, be allowed for consumers, properly regulated as a harm reduction tool.
Thank you.
Representative Humphreys.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just to follow up on Representative Heswood's first question about the baggies or the Ziploc bags, whatever. So you said in states that have passed this, it seems like there's more consistent labeling and containers. But is that because of the Secretary of Agriculture in those states wrote those rules and regulations, which I know is Section 6 in our bill, that, we're going to sort of be depending on the Secretary of Agriculture to do that? Is that how that came about, or was it something else?
Well, the fact that it's regulated and you're required to label it chases out the mom and pop operations that are buying kratom powder directly from Indonesia, not applying good manufacturing practices, which a part of that requires the vendor to actually, when they package it, they have a finished product test that's done. So you just see an evolution into a much more professional situation. I've been hounded by many of the small kratom vendors who say, "You're trying to put me out of business." And I tell them, yes, I am. I do not want on the market these kinds of products that haven't been properly tested or manufactured properly. And that's what happens. The packaging reflects the quality of the manufacturing.
Okay, thank you. But I kind of want to get to the issue too of the rules and regulations written by the secretary. Is that what happened in other states? I mean, did their bill say the same thing? Or, I'm just being on other committees, we've had times where we had a section like this and it took the secretary of whatever it happened to be in that committee months and even years to write the rules and regs. So I'm just curious your thoughts on Section 6, if that's helpful to you, and how that's played out in other states so that we can make sure that that happens in a efficient and timely way in Kansas.
So in Utah, the first state, it's the most robust kratom rule that's been enacted by the Department of Agriculture pursuant to the legislation. We have learned from experience in Utah that we didn't need that robust a rule because of the behaviors of the industry to follow good compliance for good manufacturing standards. So this I would characterize as kratom light regulation, which doesn't impose a burden on the Department of Agriculture to do a lot of the enforcement actions, because those are, as I described earlier, the self-reporting mechanism that will trigger FDA action. But it does preserve the importance of making, then the Department of Agriculture could certainly just issue the regulations of what has to be on the label. And then if you find a violative product, you can rescind their ability to sell that in the state, obviously.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Representative Jacobs.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, sir, for being here. Doing some digging around a couple days ago, asking what is kratom on the internet or on the interweb. Go to the Mayo Clinic, and they've done some studies, I guess, and they say that some of the side effects are including weight loss, dry mouth, chills, nausea, vomiting, changes in urine, constipation, liver damage, muscle pain. Kratom also affects the mind and the nervous system: dizziness, drowsiness, hallucinations, depression, breathing suppression, seizure, coma, and the last part says death. But you say that it's perfectly healthy, but do you have any facts or truth that contradict the Mayo Clinic study?
Thank you for that question, Representative. The Mayo Clinic has not done one study on kratom. We have challenged them. A philanthropist offered to fund a study that the Mayo Clinic would do, and they refused. And they said they are following the FDA. They're repeating what the FDA says. So the more specific question should be, is the FDA right? And they do list all of those so-called adverse effects. So the FDA's position was evaluated by the Assistant Secretary for Health, Dr. Zhua, in 2018, and he rejected the FDA's premise, calling it disappointingly poor evidence and data, a letter I can share with you. And he rejected it because of the potential health risk to millions of Americans who are struggling with chronic pain issues, and it would force people onto the more addictive and more dangerous substances. So he discredited what the FDA's narrative was, which is simply repeated by the Mayo Clinic. We understand that
Thank you, Mr.
there are
Chair.
people's concern. I'm sorry.
So the FDA they're not factual in their studies then?
You don't have to listen to me. You can read Dr. Joa's letter. They are not. They have gotten this wrong. And
I'm not familiar with him.
Well, Dr. Joa was the Assistant
Thank you,
Secretary.
Mr. Chair.
Dr. Joa was the Assistant Secretary for Health at the Department of Health and Human Services and the designated official to evaluate submissions by the FDA for controlled substances, which the FDA was seeking to have kratom listed. He rejected that. They've 3 times rejected it because the FDA is wrong. And the FDA has a longstanding bias against all dietary and herbal supplements, which they've tried to prosecute for decades. And this is just the latest one. Glad to share the letter with you. And a lot of science, again, you don't have to believe me, the scientists say the FDA is wrong.
Very good. And if you would get that letter to us so that we can distribute that to the committee, that would be great.
And if I could, Mr. Chairman, I've got a couple other scientific studies glad to share with you as well that are very recent.
That would be perfect.
Thank
Committee,
you.
further questions? Roosevelt Howell.
This is somewhat of a new topic to me, and I was just wondering, could you, just for my basic understanding, give me a scenario of if I wanted to use kratom, what would a good actor look like? You know, how would I know that where I went to buy it was trustworthy? Those kinds of things. Just kind of I mean, I read your testimony. You know, basic example of how someone would use it in a good way. Just really just a basic good way you would recommend of using this product.
So I recommend to everyone that asks that question, and many people do, how should I use kratom? What's the best way? We instituted at the American Kratom Association a good manufacturing programs, which requires a vendor who applies to participate in that program that they follow the standards that we outline, which mirror the FDA requirements for dietary supplement manufacturing and labeling and packaging and warnings. And so there are about 30 companies that have agreed to that. And I point consumers to go to our website, look under the GMP vendors who voluntarily submit and then have an independent third-party audit validate that what they've said is true. Now, we every year we evaluate them. We toss companies out because they don't pass muster. That's a good starting point. It helps people. And then I tell them to go to the registered products at Utah or Georgia or Nevada or Arizona, and they can see the same kinds of things. There are a lot more companies involved there that don't have the exact scrutiny we apply to it. But that's a good start. And then I refer everyone to go to kratomanswers.org. And that's a website that's co-hosted by a number of groups, including ours, which gives you the true picture of kratom, the latest science, and the regulatory framework. It's a great place to go to see the truth about kratom, including the latest science that's out there.
Thank you, Chair. Could you send some of those links to all of us?
Be glad to.
Thank you.
Committee, further questions? Okay, seeing none. Next,
Thank you.
I'm kind of confused here. I see written neutral, but I understand that Kelsey is here. Kelsey, are you prepared to testify? I have it on good authority that you are. So very good. Kelsey, welcome to committee. Thank you.
Good morning, Chairman and members of the committee. You do have written testimony in front of me. I'm happy to stand for any questions that you may have, but I believe that the testimony that's written before you outlines the agency's perspective on this current bill that we're hearing on 2084.
Very good. Questions of Kelsey? Okay, thank you very much. You are off the hook. All right, committee, further questions? That concludes the hearing on House Bill 2084. We will open the hearing now on House Bill 2188, regulating the sale of kratom. This was the bill that passed the House 2 years ago. And the first proponent I have of this bill, sorry, Mike, thank you.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, this is a more lengthy bill and a more fleshed out bill than the one that you just heard, mainly because it lists a number of duties for the Secretary of Agriculture that are not, that are covered by a rules and regulations requirement in the other bill. But anyway, this bill starts off by making this a part and supplement to the Kansas Food and Drug Cosmetic Act. So that's the section 1. Section 2 says that the secretary shall adopt rules and regulations establishing annual fees for the issuance of kratom dealer licenses. The monies from these license fees go into the Food Safety Fee Fund. Section 3 provides for the application for licensure. You've got an application for a retail sale or wholesale distribution, and then one for manufacturing. It requires that they apply the premises only one location in the application. On page 2, they have to display their license conspicuously wherever their licensed premises is. They're renewed annually by the secretary. The secretary is given the ability in subsection G on page 2 to deny the issuance of a license for different reasons, which we'll get into in a minute. And if you want to appeal, you appeal through the Kansas Administrative Procedure Act. Section 4 gives the secretary the power to inspect or cause to be inspected premises. It provides that they have access at all reasonable hours to any location. They are able to inspect the location, products, and equipment. They're able to inspect samples. They're able to investigate complaints and so on, inspect records, inspect or open any package, and take samples. Section 5 provides for actual inspection and sampling of kratom products. The duties of the Secretary of Agriculture are listed in Section 5 to include enforcing the act, taking samples and then making inspections, allow them to issue a stop sale order in cases where they believe there's a problem. They can temporarily suspend or revoke a license and so forth. They can, on page 4, subsection D, they can refuse a license, and there's different reasons there where the person has been convicted or pleaded guilty to a criminal violation of this bill, failed to comply with any provision or requirement of the act, interfered with the secretary's ability to carry out inspections, or denied the secretary access to premises. Section 6 provides for a civil penalty of not to exceed $1,000 per violation. Any person aggrieved can go to district court and appeal through the Kansas Judicial Review Act. If there is a penalty, it goes to the Education Fee Fund of the Department of Agriculture. Section 7 establishes a crime. It's a Class C misdemeanor, which is about the lowest level of misdemeanor you can get, up to 30 days in jail and a $500 fine. But anyway, it is a criminal penalty. Section 8 deals with false or ads that are false, and Section 9 deals with the rules and regulations, and then Section 10 is a definition section, which is part of the Kansas Food and Drug Cosmetic Act, and that definition is on page 10. I might point out on page 5 there that the level of the alkaloid fraction that is greater than 2%. I think the other bill had 1%. Again, I, in all honesty, don't understand these percentages and so on. But anyway, I'll try and answer questions if you've got them. This is the bill passed in 2021. It went through the House without amendment. It ended up in the Senate Federal and State Affairs Committee. They made it into a substitute bill dealing with elections, and the bill died that year. So it passed the House 97-24, I think. So.
Very good. Thank you for that. Representative Hauser.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Hey, Mark, what's the difference between this bill and the previous bill? Are they companions, or are they in competition with each other, or what?
I think they're not companions. This is a much more thorough bill in terms of regulation. The other bill leaves the regulations up to rules and regulations of the secretary. This spells it out.
Committee, further questions of the revisor? Seeing none, thank you. Okay, Representative Eppley, here to speak on 2088.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and fellow members of our Fed and State Committee. I want to take this opportunity to try to clear up maybe some misunderstandings about this bill and about the other bill that you've heard. I think a fundamental thing to really discuss right up front, and you have my testimony, and I'm going to talk a little bit from that, but I'm going to go a little bit further. This is not a hearing today to decide whether we're going to make kratom or Mitragyna speciosa legal or not in the state of Kansas. I'll give you some context on that. I was on Health and Human Services in 17, and we reviewed this thoroughly, and I mean thoroughly at that time. And we tried to decide, is this a medication or is this a food substrate? And after intense study by the committee, myself and several others, it was determined that it is indeed a food substrate and should fall under the Department of Agriculture for regulation. I wasn't very busy as a freshman legislator at that time, so I looked up the VAERS reports. I read all 64 cases where there had been case reports of kratom being in people's systems when they overdosed, and some of them passed away. So on these adverse reports, 63 of them were multiple drug use or were adulterated drugs, and so they were not pure kratom. The one fellow that died had some other health issues, and so I'd really have to say there's a extremely wide therapeutic window for kratom, and that's why your committee, your health committee, in its wisdom at that time concluded that it was appropriate to put this on the legal substances list in the state of Kansas. And again, I want to stress to you that is not what we're here to debate today. If you have problems with any food substrate, even maybe caffeine, then you should maybe vote against this bill in one form or the other. But this has already been decided. But the problem has been that for the last 5 years, since we made it a legal substance in the state of Kansas, it's been unregulated. It's been the wild, wild west. You can go to a convenience store and get a packet of green powder that they say, this is kratom. Well, I grew up cutting alfalfa, and we used to have it as a green substance. Didn't look any different than alfalfa. I opened one of those packets, didn't take any one time, but I smelled it. It smelled just like alfalfa to me. So it's been the wild, wild west of under regulation and no regulation of an industry that I think begs to be regulated by our Department of Agriculture. That's all this is about. And as you look at these two bills, you've got, I think, 2084 and 2188. I want to stress to you that 2188 is simply the Kansas version of this template bill that's before you in 2084. So in other words, if you took Section 6, look at Section 6 in 2084, this is adjunctive to, and basically a lot of the definitions and a lot of the rules and regulations in statute as it applies to the kratom industry in the state of Kansas. And I think this is a Kansas bill. I'm pretty proud of this bill. It did indeed pass out of this committee 2 years ago. It did go to the House floor, and on the very last day passed 97-24, as you were told. I had forgotten that. I had so much post-traumatic stress disorder over the APRN bill because I was very worried they were going to do a gut and go and put the APRN bill in this bill. And I thought, boy, that would be interesting. But it didn't happen. It passed the floor. It went to the Senate, and then it got gut and goed in another bill, as you heard, and it died. So that's why for 5 years, 6 years, we have not had any regulation of this industry. We need regulation of the kratom industry in the state of Kansas. They're here asking for regulation. They've come up with a template bill. And I will correct one thing in this bill, and it's wrong, and it's what happens in 2 years. We've learned that the safe percentage should be 1%, not 2%. And in this bill, it does specify 2% because that was the thinking at that time. So it's been reduced a little bit, and that was frankly an update for me. You know, this has been around. Kratom, Mitragyna speciosa, has been around for 200 years. I said 100 years in my testimony. It comes from the Far East, and it was used extensively by Vietnam veterans that brought it back to us. It does have 3 properties that we talked about, and the property I want to tell you about briefly is it's very effective in primary care for folks with addiction disorders. It's much less the lesser of evils when you take people that are addicted to opioids, for example, various types. I know of 2 cases in my practice where I've recommended kratom. I recommended the dose, and over time, the patients were completely able to get off their opioids and control their pain in the process. And they're doing great. Now, the doses were higher than what was listed. It was, in one case, it was 6 to 8 grams a day. The other one is 8 to 10 grams a day. So it's significant dose, but they're doing fine and haven't demonstrated any problems with dependency or any other bad health outcomes. Now, that's not to say if you research the literature and look, you know, if you're a person that doesn't want any new food substrates on the market, you'll find, I think, one state, and man, Mac may know this better than I do. I know one state has made it illegal because of the FDA letter. And I know a lot of states have, like Kansas, have gone ahead and put it on their legal food substrate list. So that's what we chose to do 6 years ago. I feel very confident that was the right thing to do. And I feel confident today that we need to provide Kansas regulations for this through our Department of Agriculture. So I would be happy to stand for questions at the appropriate time. And I appreciate listening to my testimony. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you, Representative. Representative Hauser.
Man, thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm first all time. Representative, thank you for your testimony. That was awesome. So going forward with these 2 bills, and I said we were to work these in committee, would it be beneficial to combine the 2? Because as the reviser said, the one bill leaves everything to the agencies to figure out, and this bill that you brought in kind of has it figured out. So should we meld these 2 together in committee or something?
Well, I don't know the word companion. I'd say adjunctive. I do think that the second bill is adjunctive to the first bill. The first bill is it's just a template. It says what we should do, and it leaves it all up to rules and regulations through the Department of Ag to develop all this. The second bill that we had 2 years ago goes ahead and defines a lot of the actions of the Department of Ag in certain areas. And I think it's pretty comprehensive, and I think they go together well. Yes, I think kind of, hand in glove.
Representative Clayton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Representative, could you just refresh for me? I know that we have passed this bill out through our chamber. Did it go to the lesser chamber and fail or not be heard? Or what happened last biennium?
It fell victim at the very end of session in 21 to a gut and go. They put an election bill in there and they got rid of the contents of this. So they didn't feel this had apparently much merit or need at that time. And there was a lot, as you know, at the end of session, how unusual things can get at the end. So it lost its mojo and it got gut and goed.
Committee, further questions? Representative Ruiz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Eppley, on the synopsis of the Ms. Olson's testimony or letter on the front says, the primary concern, the testing required by the bill does not substantially lower the risk factors associated with consumption of kratom. FDA is warning consumers not to use kratom because it affects the same opioid brain receptors as morphine, appears to have properties that expose users to risks of addiction, abuse, and independence, kind of like what the representative over here was stating. You as a physician, do you agree with that?
I don't always agree with the FDA positions on certain things. And this I would take exception to, and I think many physicians would take exception to this. I don't know how many attempts. I think Max said there had been 3 attempts by the FDA. And it's the dilemma, the debate of whether this is a medication or a food substrate. And through my own research and outline of what I've read, I've concluded it is a food substrate. And it should be subject then to agriculture, not in the House of Medicine. And that's why give you a similar analogy, CBD. You know, we had discussions on CBD in 17. We also were discussing whether CBD should be on the legal list of substances in the state of Kansas. And, you know, we finally concluded that it should be. Now, admittedly, and I don't want to get into this today, there are some issues with CBD that we probably need to vet out and look at. But CBD is legal in the state of Kansas, and to my knowledge, it's legal in all 50 states in some form. So again, it's another food substrate, which comes from the marijuana plant, but it's a different alkaloid of the marijuana plant. So this is a very similar discussion. And you know, there are some components of CBD that are probably less safe than what's in kratom, but you know, we're still selling that over the counter, and that's another discussion that we can talk about later, Representative. But so back to your question, I don't fully embrace or agree with the FDA position on that, and the Committee on Health did not either at that time, under good guidance from a subcommittee of us that met and reviewed all this material, brought it back to the House at that time, and we put it on the safe substances list for the state of Kansas.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Jacobs.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Representative Epley. And I do, for the most part, agree with this outline. And if we're going to sell this drug or food, we do need regulations. I agree. On page 5 of the bill, on line 27, new section 8, when it talks about the advertisement of kratom products shall be deemed a false claim if advertised as false or misleading in any particular aspect of such product, including but not limited to any claims not authorized by the Federal Food and Drug Administration or the Secretary. What are these claims? What would be false claims in this premise?
Could you refer me to which page again?
Yes, sir. Page 5.
I was on the wrong page, sorry.
Starting on line 27, that new section 8.
One claim might be that in yours, in my case, it might grow hair on her head, or perhaps Representative from Columbus, you know, it might grow hair on her head, and that's not a fault. That'd be a false claim.
Has there been? No, I'm just kidding. No studies. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Representative Bryce.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Dr. Epley, thank you for presenting. That's great. I just had a quick question. Do we know of other similar substances or other substances, CBD or something, that have had similar legislation, so we can use it as kind of to predict how this legislation would be effective, and if there would be any unintended consequences, and how we can maybe structure this legislation? Are there other substances that have a similar type of legislation we can use as a track record? Thank you.
Thank you for the question. And if I can respond briefly, it's, you know, the only thing in my little brief legislative career would be CBD. I mean, we put those on at the same time, and the Department of Ag embraced a lot of good regulatory activity, I think, for CBD. And again, I don't want to get into it today, but there are some issues with CBD that at a different time we probably need to get into to do a better job on CBD. You know, we're hearing reports of Delta 8 and the Delta alkaloids from CBD that are currently legal, I believe, in the state of Kansas and other states. And those, you know, those concern me. But that's another discussion. And Mr. Chair, while I have the mic, may I ask one of the committee members a question?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair. You seem reluctant there. I want everybody to know that we have an esteemed colleague here. I do, from the emergency room, that probably sees more overdoses and more issues than I do, and I think it's worthy of. And I know you're not, you know, giving testimony today, but you've worked in an ER. You've worked a night or two in an ER, and so in your couple of years of experience, you do have some gray hair, so we'll say maybe decades of experience in emergency rooms, have you seen many cases of significant kratom overdoses? And or were these adulterated substances, or can you comment about that? I'd be curious what experience you bring to the table on this, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have not seen a single kratom or there's polypharmacy. People have multiple substances, but in my experience, nearly 40 years in emergency rooms, I haven't seen it as a problem as a single drug. But the nature of it is there's some kinds combinations of drugs that people have effects, and it's hard to sort out which drugs that's what. Thank you for the question.
And thank you for the answer. And again, that bears upon the fact that's why we need regulation. It's legal, but it's a wild, wild west of no regulation. We need our Department of Ag to step up, and it's not like they need more to do, but they want to do this, and this would be a good thing for them to take on through these two bills, however we work that out. So.
Yeah, and I might ask Representative Bryce Berry, could you state your name and where you're from for the record? Don't do that to me again, Representative Epley.
Yes, I am Ron Bryce from District 11. Thank you.
All right, very good. Representative Heiberger.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm just going back to Representative Jacobs' question. It's my understanding, based on testimony here, that the Federal Food and Drug Administration doesn't think that kratom is safe or effective, and so wouldn't Section 8 preventing anybody from advertising that make a claim that's not authorized by the Federal Food and Drug Administration, wouldn't that make any kratom dealer prohibit them from claiming that kratom is safe and effective?
Well, again, to my knowledge, that's a letter. It's not law yet. So I think if they want to say that a kratom vendor says this may help you with anxiety, this may help you with your energy level, I think those are valid claims that they can put on the labeling. But beyond that, I'm not aware of anything else.
But would that claim be authorized by the Federal Food and Drug Administration?
Well, it doesn't need to be authorized by the Federal Drug Administration because they can say that, but there's been no action taken officially by the FDA on this drug. I mean, they've attempted it repeatedly, but it's never been consummated.
To me, the way I read this, it would require positive action from the Federal Food and Drug Administration. What it says is an advertisement for a kratom product is a false claim if I'm not going to read the whole thing, but that the prohibition is limited to any claims not authorized by the Federal Food and Drug Administration or the Secretary. That seems like that's pretty restrictive to me.
I could defer to another conferee. I'm not good at the legalese on all that. So I can't really answer that, Representative.
Very good. Committee, further questions? Representative Humphreys.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It seems to me that it's going to be the committee's responsibility in a way to reconcile the two bills, because the proponents of one are neutral and then the proponents of the other. And so I guess my question would be the same for the neutrals that are coming up if they're going to testify, not just written. Why do you prefer one over the other? I mean, I think like we've said, it's already legal. We need regulation. But why do you prefer one bill over the other? Just so as we start discussing it, or if we work it as a committee, if the chair chooses to do that, it would be good for us to hear from the parties, their reasoning for one bill over the other. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
As is the case with many items that we take action on, just like we took action on this 6 years ago, we don't think out the unintended consequences, in this case, of regulation. And so we pass a lot of bills here that don't get into rules and regulations. We ask the rules and regulations to be created by other entities. And that's why you have a template bill, and this bill takes it to the next step and creates a lot of those rules and regulations in law that we're asking the Department of Ag to go ahead and follow up front. So it just takes it takes it a step further. But we've done that on many other subject areas where rules and regs are promulgated later on, and sometimes, in my opinion, not in the full intent of the law. So that's why I like 2188 better, because it's more directive to the Department of Ag on what their duties and responsibilities are that could be overlooked in the template bill, in my humble opinion. And again, others in the neutral category may want to testify differently, but that's how I see it, Representative. And I that's why I like the second bill that we passed 2 years ago. I hope I answered that for you.
Representative Kessler.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Representative, I'm just still trying to wrap my head around this a little bit. I mean, we have, I appreciate the industry coming forward too. They're trying to remove the bad actors. These bad actors have left a pretty good stain on this industry over the years. But we have a product that is, to our testimony today and yourself, is a relatively safe product. We can't really attribute any natural, or not natural, but deaths to the product. Really haven't described any adverse effects that seem to be real. How much regulation do we really need on a product that fits all those categories when we have the industry coming forward wanting some non-invasive stuff to get rid of the bad actors? I mean, but how much? I mean, when it comes to licensings and facility inspections, and I mean, at what point do we say, okay, we might have went over the line a little bit on regulation versus getting to the root cause of what we really want to accomplish?
Well, thank you for the question. And I'll try to respond and say, you know, like this substance, like many items that we take action on, you have representatives and individuals, elected officials, that think that things like this are certainly very underregulated. And then you have others that think it's very overregulated and goes way too far. It's government overreach, you know, all the optics of that. And I understand that. It's hard to find balance in that. And that's why I can understand why you think that the second bill may go too far. But because knowledge of kratom is continuing to come to the forefront, for example, 2% down to 1% that we heard about, I think it's good to put as many appropriate, I think, regulations in place from the get-go than trying to do it later on through the Department of Ag, bringing us other trailer bills or whatever that's needed. I think this provides a framework, if you will, for that going forward. And you know, if you read the second bill, it's I think it's pretty innocuous. The fees are not burdensome, but it does empower the Department of Ag to do a lot of oversight on this industry, because into the future there could be new things we discover about this. I don't think we will, but at least it allows testing, it allows appropriate labeling, and I think those are important items as example.
Representative Jacobs.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Representative Epley, again. And I agree with that statement. We look like how we regulated alcohol, and we've dwindled those regulations down quite a bit. So the more we've learned. But I do have a question on page 4 now on new section 6. We could just go to line 42 and 43 where the penalties are going to the education fee fund of the Department of Agriculture. Is that all 100% of those proceeds or those penalties, up to the $1,000 fine?
That's my memory and understanding in the current bill, in this bill that we're looking at. Yes.
Okay. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Any further questions? Okay, very good. Seeing none. Mac, you're up again. Sorry to do it this way.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Representative. You could just say ditto if you were interested in that and stand for questions.
Thank you. My name is Matt Caddo again, the Senior Fellow in Public Policy with the American Kratom Association. Just one clarification, we do not represent the industry. We represent consumers. There are probably several thousand kratom consumers or manufacturers in the United States. The vast majority of them oppose regulation. They like the Wild West. We're here trying to bring some kind, advocate for some kind of regulatory scheme because, as you've heard before, and Representative Epley said it correctly, it is the Wild West. In Kansas, you can buy these products today, and consumers, when they walk into a store and purchase a Kratom product, it is the Wild West. And they are at risk of purchasing a Kratom product that has an adulterant in it, and a dangerous adulterant in many cases. So that's why we push so hard for this. We're neutral on this bill, but I want to say that Representative Epley is a champion because he's speaking up for consumers and protecting their safety, which we completely concur with. We learned something in the last couple of years about Kratom, which accounts for why we advocate for what is a less regulatory scheme. And what we've learned is that in 2018, a letter which rescinded the FDA's recommendation to the Drug Enforcement Administration for the scheduling of Kratom as a Schedule I controlled substance. We didn't learn about that letter until 2020. When we discovered it, what Assistant Secretary of Health Jawaz said was that based on new emerging science, the FDA was wrong about Kratom. Since 2018, there have been more than 100 new peer-reviewed published studies which enhance the understanding of Kratom as a safe product when it is used responsibly and as a valuable harm reduction tool. That's why we advocate for a less regulatory scheme. We think that the evidence that is now available about the safety profile of Kratom is significant in that regard. Now, with respect to the issue about what is the proper labeling, and the Representative Heiberger asked about it, was, well, what about this provision if the FDA doesn't approve it? The FDA, under the Food and Drug and Cosmetic Act, has authority for drugs and dietary supplements to control their labeling. But unless a product is approved under those two, Kratom as a food has no pre-approval by the FDA. So the only provisions under the FDA laws, if you are not a dietary supplement approved, what's called a new dietary ingredient notification, you are not allowed to put labeling on there that says it reduces anxiety, it reduces pain. You're not permitted to do that as a food. And so we think that that's an important enhancement here. People are not misled by this. Now, people can make intelligent, informed decisions about the consumption of a Kratom product. They can look at the label to make sure that it is pure Kratom, and that protects them. And that's why we're neutral on this bill. We applaud what Representative Epley has done. It's the right way. We've just learned a couple of important things. The Utah, as I mentioned earlier, was the first state to pass it with the most robust regulatory scheme. The Regulatory Affairs Director of the Department of Agriculture in Utah said their problem, now that the law is in effect, is not with adulterated products, because those are chased out of Utah. He has problems with Kratom products that don't have any metrogenine or 7-hydroxymetrogenine in them. Now, that's consumer fraud. But if that's the problem we have to deal with, people are not put at risk by not having any Kratom in the Kratom product. But they are if you have a mislabeled product or a dangerously adulterated product, which is what this legislation, either version or a merged version, will do. We have to protect the Kansas citizens from those rogue, bad actor Kratom manufacturers who are selling products that are simply dangerous today. That's what we want to protect. Glad to answer any questions.
Committee questions.
And Mr. Chairman, I did submit with my testimony in the first bill, the letter from Admiral Jawad, Dr. Jawad, the Assistant Secretary of Health. I'll recirculate it. And we also circulated the Johns Hopkins study, which talks about adult Kratom use and the reduction in withdrawal symptoms in the 35% were opioid-free replacement with Kratom within a year. We'll recirculate that as well, along with some other scientific evidence.
Very good. Thank you for that. Representative Heiberger.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll kick this dead horse one more time, but in your knowledge, has the FDA ever authorized anybody to make any claims whatsoever about Kratom?
No, the procedure for doing that would be to apply for a new dietary ingredient notification. There have been 7 new dietary ingredient notifications filed with the FDA. All have been rejected. The most recent one had a human clinical trial on Kratom that passed with flying colors. The FDA is not going to pass or approve any new dietary ingredient notification until they're compelled to, which is why there's now federal legislation that's been filed.
Thank you. I just think the wording on Section 8 of this bill needs a little tweaking. Otherwise, it would prohibit anybody from making any
Great.
claims whatsoever.
Committee, further questions? Very good. Thank you for that.
Thanks very
Thank
much.
you, Mac. Okay, next, Kelsey, can you come up for a minute? I do have a few questions. Committee, do you have any questions of the Department of Ag? So we're looking at these two bills here, and one obviously requires you to provide a lot more regulation, a lot more oversight. And then I also, at the same time, the fiscal note on the first bill that we heard, which was 2084, is roughly 160,000 or 69,000, and the other one is 99,000. So how does that work? Obviously, so are you using the fees to supplement the bill? I mean, I'm just trying to figure out, one requires way more work for the Department of Ag, but it costs less. So could you explain that to me? Thank you.
Certainly. And I appreciate the comment because it is confusing. When we sat down and looked at the fiscal note in 2188, it has a lot of framework that outlines specific areas of which the Department of Agriculture is supposed to oversee. That specific bill fits within our existing food and safety and lodging program. So the food definition that's listed there at the top matches the existing food definition that we have for our food safety and lodging program. So in order to incorporate Kratom into that program, we think that largely the program structure could inherit the oversight of Kratom. Meaning that likely the retailers are already entities that are licensed, such as gas stations, grocery stores. Many of those we believe already exist within the food safety license that is there. So inheriting or taking on the Kratom oversight, we think that there would be an increased cost. However, it would not necessarily substantiate a whole new program or division, or we're already going into those facilities. We don't need new inspectors. We just need some training and some administrative elements to that. Whereas the first bill, 2084, it leaves it very open as to whether this fits within the food safety and lodging program. The food definition is different than the food definition that the food safety program already exists under. And if we were reviewing labels I think there's a lot of open interpretation of how that could be handled. So we didn't feel like it warranted quite the same fiscal note when we sat down and tried to interpret it from an agency perspective.
But it clearly requires more presence in the Department of Ag.
Yes,
in the inspection process.
To some degree, yeah. I don't think the first bill necessarily authorizes us to go out and inspect. It authorizes us to license manufacturers, which we don't know that there's any in the state, and review labels. And if you submit for a label review, that's a different fee as opposed to going out and inspecting facilities routinely.
And hence, I'm still struggling with why it costs less if you don't have the responsibility of going out and inspecting these facilities and sending an inspector out there, and yet the fiscal note is higher. I'm struggling with that.
I think that the bills ask to do different things, and the more complicated bill fits within an existing program that we wouldn't need to go in and bring on additional FTEs. We could review it within the existing system of the food safety program.
Hang on just a second here. That's it. A lot of it is in this Cliff Note here. It's the testing for 2084 would cost around $700 a sample. So
thank you. Yes, we
so
don't.
The first one does not require testing.
Yeah, there would be my understanding is that the label would be that could be done outside. We took the first one as if we would having to do the testing within our testing laboratory that we have. And we are not currently set up to oversee those, to administer those types of tests currently.
So 2088 does not require testing, but 2084 does.
It does not outline the provisions for specific sampling of that. And perhaps the revisor could speak more to that.
Mike, could you clear this up for me? I'm struggling here.
Well, 2180, I'm not sure I can clear up the physical note difference, but the 2188 does in fact require inspection and testing and so on. I guess I've got a question. If you've got just basic rule and regulation authority, would you have the ability to license these retailers and producers?
I don't believe 2084 gives us the authority to license and inspect those retailers as it's outlined currently.
So could you repeat that, please? So Mike, could you repeat your question and then?
The question is, does 2084 give the Department of Ag the ability, just by saying you adopt rules and regulations, to actually license the people that sell and produce and manufacture this stuff? And the answer that you gave was?
I don't believe that we would have the authority to license the retailers. That section in there, it talks about, well, with the right evidence, we would assume that the retailer is operating on good faith. It puts the burden on the manufacturer of the product.
Very good. So that's 2084 and 2188 would require licensing of each
of those retailers.
Each retailer that sold the product.
Correct. And we believe largely those retailers already exist within the food safety licensing program.
So with that, would it be a separate fee? Yeah, or would it be included in their food retailer's license fee?
So the food retailer license fees are established on a risk-based assessment, meaning that it doesn't necessarily depend if they are 1,000 square feet, or it depends on the type of products that are being sold. Our preliminary conversation with our program is we think that in order to identify the kratom retailers, we'd need to have some sort of additional fee that would acknowledge that they are a kratom dealer, because it's difficult to go in and see what they're selling, the whole list. So it would be a nominal fee, but it would not necessarily be a whole substantial new fee that would fit within the existing licensing risk-based system that we have.
And right now you do not inspect for kratom or anything else?
We do not.
Okay.
No.
So just to be clear. Committee questions. Representative Jacobs.
Thank you, sir. With this fee on 2188, page 2, line 3, the fee amount or payment, that's just $5 for duplicate license. Is this the section that you're talking about for fees that you would get from persons who are selling it?
I apologize, I didn't bring a copy of the bill up with me. So, but I believe there is a section that outlines the fee element of what we could work within the food safety program.
Mike, can you speak to that?
The bill in section 2, sub A, requires the fees be set by rule and regulation. The $5 is for if you lose your you need a duplicate license. So you pay $5 if you somehow lost your license, is the way I read that. So, but it doesn't establish a fee of $5 originally.
Committee, further questions? Well, I think we're done here. Thank you very much, Kelsey, for your written testimony. Very good. Committee, we are adjourned. Well, hold on just a second. We will be working bills previously worked next week. So if you do have amendments ready, get with the revisor and get your amendments ready. Just be ready. We will be working bills previously heard next week. Thank you.